The boy had been shining the old man's shoes for 43 days before anyone else on Osu Oxford Street noticed the old man at all. He arrived every morning at 7:14, before the bread sellers unlocked their stalls and before the traffic on the main road had thickened into its usual midday knot. He sat on the same low wooden bench outside the post office, wearing the same dark trousers and the same white shirt, with the top button done all the way up. He never bought anything from the market. He never spoke to anyone except the boy. And the boy, who was 11 years old and had been working that corner since he was 9, had never once asked him his name. He had just learned the man's shoes, the way a person learns the grammar of something they will need later. On the morning of the 44th day, 4 black SUVs arrived at the corner at 7:09 a.m. And the men who stepped out of them were not buying bread and were not there for anyone else on that street. Kofi Mensah was 11 years old, 4 feet 9 inches tall, and had been running a shoe-shining operation from a corner of Osu Oxford Street in Accra since he was 9. His kit lived in a plastic crate his mother's neighbor had thrown out. 3 brushes, 2 tins of polish, 1 black, 1 tan, a cloth cut from an old-school uniform, and a small bottle of water he refilled at the standpipe behind the post office each morning before 6:45. The crate weighed 4.2 kilograms. He carried it on his shoulder from the one-room house on Kwai Lane, where he lived with his mother and his 2 younger sisters, 18 minutes on foot, every morning except Sunday, which was the one day his mother said no. He charged 2 cedis per pair on weekdays and 3 cedis on Saturdays, when the market traffic was heavier and men going to meetings wore their better shoes. He had 11 regular customers. He knew all of them by their shoes before he knew them by their faces. The cracked brown loafers belonging to the man who ran the mobile money booth, the pointed black Oxfords of the lawyer who passed at exactly 8:30 every Tuesday, the tired white sneakers of the woman who sold fabric 3 stalls down and who was not a shoe customer, but who sometimes gave him half of whatever she was eating at midday if she had extra. He kept his earnings in a tin box under the sleeping mat in the corner of the room he shared with his sisters. By the 43rd day, the tin box held 347 cedis and some coins, which was the most money he had ever owned at one time in his life. His mother's name was Abena Mensah. She was 34 years old, worked 6 days a week pressing clothes at a laundry on Cantonments Road that opened at 6:30 a.m. and closed at 7:00 p.m. She smelled, when she came home, of steam and starch and something underneath those things, which was the smell of a woman who had been standing for 12 hours and was not going to let her children see what that cost her. She had kept Kofi in school until the fees became what they became, and then she had sat with him at the small table in their room and said, "I need you to help me, but I need you to keep reading." He still read. He had 3 books he had taken from the school library the week he left. He did not think of it as stealing, because he had asked the teacher, and the teacher had looked at him for a long time and then said, "Take them." And he had read all 3 so many times that certain pages had separated from the spine, and he carried them folded in the back of his school uniform shorts, which he still wore because they were the only shorts he had that did not have a hole in them. He had noticed the old man on a Tuesday, which was the 43rd day before everything changed, though at the time it was simply the first day. The old man had come to the bench at 7:14 and had sat without looking at anyone, and had placed both feet flat on the ground in front of him in the way of a person who had been taught a long time ago to sit correctly and had never stopped. His shoes were black, a very old pair of cap-toe Oxfords with a welt that had been resoled at least twice, and they had been polished recently, within the last 3 or 4 days, but not by someone who knew what they were doing. There were streaks near the toe cap where the cloth had skipped, and the left heel had a smear of dried mud just above the sole that the polisher had missed entirely. Kofi looked at the shoes the way he looked at all shoes on that corner. Then he picked up his crate and walked over. He said, "Your left heel has mud on it." The old man looked at him. He had a face that was difficult to age, somewhere between 70 and 80, skin pulled close over high cheekbones, eyes that were very calm and very focused in a way that did not match the stillness of the rest of him. He did not speak. Kofi said, "I can fix it." 2 cedis. The old man looked at his shoes. Then he looked at Kofi. He reached into the breast pocket of his white shirt and removed 2 folded cedis and held them out. Kofi took them, set down his crate, and went to work. He did the left heel first, working the mud loose with the edge of the cloth dampened from his water bottle, then buffing it out in circles that moved from the center of the smear outward. He did the streaks at the toe cap with the black polish, light on the brush, and 3 passes before the 4th pass that brought out the shine. He did both heels, then the sides, then the toe caps in sequence. He did not rush. He had learned that rushing was the thing that separated a 2 cedi job from a job someone would come back for. When he finished, the old man looked at his shoes for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, slowly, he did not say anything. He stood up carefully, the way old people stood when their knees had opinions about the speed of the operation, and he walked away in the direction of the main road. Kofi watched him go. Then he put his brushes back in the crate and went back to his corner. The old man came back the next morning at 7:14. He came back the morning after that. He came back every morning for 43 days. And on each of those mornings, Kofi did his shoes. And on each of those mornings, the old man paid 2 cedis and said nothing. Sometimes Kofi talked while he worked. About the market. About the morning traffic. About something he had read in one of the 3 library books. And the old man would listen with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes on some middle distance over the top of Kofi's head. Sometimes he would nod at something Kofi said. He never responded in words, and Kofi, who had been watching people from his corner for 2 years and who had learned things about human beings from their shoes that most adults learned about people from their faces, did not push. Some people, he understood, were not withholding themselves. They were simply quiet in the way that very deep water is quiet. Not because nothing is there, but because what is there does not need to announce itself. On the 19th day, it rained. Not a light rain, the kind that came in from the sea in the late dry season, a sideways rain that arrived fast and left puddles between the paving stones that were still there the next afternoon. Kofi had been watching the sky from 6:30 and had decided not to go to the corner because wet shoes were harder to shine and wet customers were bad-tempered, and there was no shelter on his side of the post office wall. He stayed home instead, reading the book about the engineer who built a dam. The pages about the calculations were the ones he had read the most times, because the way the numbers fitted together made a kind of sense that felt to him like music felt to other people. The old man arrived at the corner at 7:14 anyway. He sat on the bench in the rain with his hands on his knees and waited. Kofi's mother's neighbor, a woman named Comfort, who sold plantain chips from a tray near the post office entrance, told Kofi this later that afternoon. She said the old man sat there for exactly 31 minutes and then stood up and left. She said she had almost gone to ask him if he needed something, but something about the way he was sitting had stopped her. She said he sat in the rain like a man who had decided the rain was not his concern. Kofi was at the corner the next morning at 6:42, and he stayed until 7:40, which was past the old man's usual departure time. At 7:14, the old man arrived, sat down, and said nothing about the previous day. Kofi said nothing about it either. He did the shoes, the old man paid 2 cedis, the old man left. But before he left, He reached into his breast pocket and set something on the edge of the bench beside where Kofi's crate was resting. It was a folded piece of paper. Kofi looked at it. The old man walked away without looking back. Kofi unfolded the paper. It was a problem. A mathematics problem, written in a very small, very precise hand, the numbers sitting exactly on an invisible line. It was unlike anything from his school textbooks. It involved a sequence, not the kind that had a simple rule, but the kind where the rule itself changed based on the position in the sequence, and you had to find the underlying pattern before you could find the next term. Kofi stared at it for a long time. Then, he folded it carefully, tucked it in the back of his shorts with the loose library pages, and went back to his next customer. He thought about it for the rest of the day. He thought about it while he ate his mother's soup that night, groundnut soup, with just enough pepper, which was his mother's measure of care disguised as cooking. He thought about it while his sisters slept beside him. At 11:17 p.m., he got up, took his pencil from the pocket in the school uniform hanging on the wall nail, and wrote in the margin of the back page of the Dam Builder book. By 12:04 a.m., he had the answer. He lay back down on the mat and looked at the ceiling and felt the particular quiet that comes when a hard thing becomes clear. He brought the paper back the next morning with the answer written under the problem in his own hand, using the same small, precise numbers he had copied from the old man's writing. He set it on the bench when the old man sat down and did not say anything about it while he worked. When he finished the shoes, and the old man paid his 2 cedis and picked up the paper, he studied the answer for a long time. He looked at Kofi. He folded the paper once. He put it back in his breast pocket. He stood up and left. The next morning, he brought another problem. If what you are feeling right now is what I think you are feeling, subscribe before we get to what was discovered about that old man on the morning of the 44th day, because what the men in those SUVs had come to say is something Kofi did not know was possible, and the old man had been quietly preparing for the entire time. The problems came every morning after that. They were harder than anything Kofi had encountered in 2 years of school. Harder than the textbooks he had read cover to cover in the years before he left. Harder than anything on the pages he carried in his shorts. Some of them were mathematics. Some were spatial, patterns that had to be rotated in the mind before they resolved. Some were language puzzles, the kind where the surface meaning of the sentence concealed a different structure underneath, and you had to find the hidden grammar before the words made sense. Kofi solved every one of them, not always quickly. There were 3 that took him 2 days, working at night on the mat while his sisters breathed beside him. But he solved them, and he brought the answers back written in the same small hand, and every morning the old man would study the answer, fold the paper, and put it in his breast pocket. He had 17 folded papers in that pocket by the 43rd day. Kofi had not counted. He found out the number later. On the 43rd day, the old man arrived at 7:14, as he always did. Kofi did his shoes. The old man paid 2 cedis. He did not bring a new problem. He sat for a moment after Kofi had finished, longer than he usually sat, with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. Then he looked at Kofi directly. He had never done this before. His gaze had always been somewhere slightly past Kofi's face, as though what he was watching was something that lived just behind the boy's shoulder. Now he looked at him the way you look at something you have been waiting to see clearly for a long time. He said, "What is your mother's name?" Kofi said, "Abina Mensa." The old man nodded slowly. He said, "You have been solving problems that university students cannot solve." Kofi did not respond. The old man said, "I know. He said it the way someone says "I know" when they are not confirming information. When they are closing a question they have already answered for themselves over a long period of time. He stood up, carefully, and walked away in the direction of the main road. Kofi watched him go, then looked at his crate, then looked at the empty bench. Comfort was watching from her plantain tray. She looked at Kofi and shrugged in the particular way she shrugged things, which meant, "I have seen many things on this corner, and I do not understand all of them, and I have made my peace with that." The next morning, Kofi arrived at 6:42 as always. He had his crate on his shoulder and his library page folded in his shorts and his tin of black polish and his tin of tan polish. He set up his kit. He waited. At 7:09, 5 minutes before the old man's usual time, 4 black SUVs turned onto Osu Oxford Street from the main road and stopped in front of the post office. They stopped in a specific arrangement, 2 at the front, 1 at the side, 1 at the rear, with a precision that had nothing accidental in it. The men who stepped out moved in a way that made the whole street rearrange itself. The bread sellers looked up. The mobile money man stood from his stool. The fabric seller took 3 steps back from her stall. Even the traffic on the road seemed to thicken and slow. The men from the SUVs wore identical dark suits, and each had a small pin on his lapel that caught the early light in a way that suggested it was not decorative. One of them spoke into a device at his wrist. Then a woman got out of the third vehicle. She was somewhere in her 50s, wearing a tailored blue suit and carrying a leather portfolio under her arm. She looked around the street once, quickly, the way people look when they are confirming a location they already know precisely and are simply verifying that reality matches the information they were given. Her eyes found Kofi. She walked to him directly, without looking at anything else. She said, "Are you Kofi Mensah?" He said he was. She said, "My name is Ama Owusu Boateng. I am the Executive Director of the Nkrumah Foundation for Mathematics and Science. You have been working with one of our trustees for 44 days. She opened the leather portfolio. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and beneath it, 17 folded pieces of paper that Kofi recognized. The same small, precise handwriting, the same invisible baseline, with his own answers written underneath each one. She said, "He asked us to come." The old man's name, she told him, was Professor Kwadwo Akebe. He had been a mathematician at the University of Ghana for 31 years before his retirement, had published 42 papers in journals that Ama Owusu Boateng named, and had been on the board of the Nkrumah Foundation since its founding in 2003. He had retired from teaching, but not from looking, not from the particular habit that had never left him in 60 years of working with numbers, which was the habit of recognizing the quality of a mind from the quality of its questions. He had been at the corner on that first Tuesday not because he had been looking for a shoe-shine boy. He had been at the post office for an errand. He had seen Kofi notice the mud on his left heel from 4 meters away, and something in the specific quality of that noticing had made him sit down on the bench instead of walking on. He had designed the problems himself, she said. The sequence in the first paper was a modified version of a problem that had appeared in an international mathematics competition in 2019, and which the winning student had taken 47 minutes to solve. Kofi had solved it by midnight on the first night. The third problem, the one that had taken him 2 days, was a problem that Professor Akebe had been sitting with for 6 years. A problem that had no published solution in any journal he had read. The answer Kofi had written in the margin of the Dom Builder book, and then transferred carefully onto the folded paper, was correct. Ama Owusu Boateng said this quietly, the way facts are stated when they are very large and need room to breathe. Kofi was standing with his plastic crate on his shoulder. He did not say anything for a long time. She placed the single sheet of paper in front of him. It was a full scholarship letter from the Nkrumah Foundation, covering fees, housing, books, and a monthly stipend of 800 cedis for his mother, beginning at the start of the next academic term at the government boys' secondary school in East Legon. It was signed at the bottom by 5 names. The last name on the list was Prof. K. Akebe, she said. He asked me to tell you one more thing. She said it quietly, exactly as he had given her the words to say, which were, the rain was not important. What mattered was that you had already done the work. Kofi set down his crate. He set it down the same way he always set it down, carefully, the heavier side first, the brushes positioned so they would not roll. He looked at the letter. His mother's neighbor Comfort was watching from her plantain tray, with both hands pressed flat on the counter. The fabric seller had not gone back to her stall. The mobile money man was still standing. Nobody on that section of Osu Oxford Street was doing anything except watching a boy of 11 stand in the early morning light and read a piece of paper that was about to change the direction of everything. Ama Owusu Boateng said, "Can we take you to see your mother?" Kofi folded the letter carefully along its existing creases. He tucked it inside the back of his shorts, next to the loose library pages. He picked up his crate. He said, "She is on Cantonments Road." The laundry. Professor Kwadwo Akebe came to the corner one final time, on the day Kofi left for East Legon. He arrived at 7:14, sat on the bench and placed his feet flat on the ground. His shoes were, as always, the black cap-toe Oxfords, resoled twice, the welt showing the honest wear of a man who walked. Kofi sat at the bench beside him and opened his kit one last time and did the shoes in the order he always did them. Left heel, right heel, the sides, the toe caps. 3 light passes, and then the 4th that brought out the shine. The old man paid 2 cedis. He did not bring a problem. He sat for a moment after Kofi had finished, and then he looked at the boy with the same direct gaze he had turned on him the last morning on the corner, and he said 4 words. He said, "You already knew everything." Then he stood up and walked in the direction of the main road, and Kofi watched him go until the white shirt and the dark trousers had moved past the bread stalls and the fabric market, and turned the corner, and were gone. Professor Akebe had known something that the street did not know, that the laundry on Cantonments Road did not know, that the school system that had stopped seeing Kofi clearly had not taken the time to know. He had known it not from a test, or a file, or an application form. He had known it from a shoe shine, from the specific quality of attention that a boy of 11 brought to a left heel with a streak of mud at 7:14 in the morning, before the bread sellers had unlocked their stalls. He had sat down because that quality of attention was something he had spent 60 years learning to recognize, and he had never in 60 years seen it in that form, in that place, at that age, in a boy carrying a 4.2-kilogram crate on his shoulder. There are people in this world who will hand you 2 cedis for an hour of your best work and feel they have given you everything they owe you. And then there are people who will sit on a bench in the rain for 31 minutes and bring you a problem that has no published solution, and wait quietly to see what you will do with it. The difference between those 2 kinds of people is not cruelty, it is vision. Most people look at a child on a corner with a plastic crate, and they see only the crate. A rare few look at the child. The world always overlooks someone. And the ones who get overlooked longest, who keep working and keep solving and keep pressing the cloth in circles that move from the center outward, they are often carrying the answer to a question that the overlooking world has not even thought to ask yet. If a child you passed every day, a child doing the most ordinary work on the most ordinary corner, turned out to hold something extraordinary, would you have seen it? Not in hindsight. at 7:14, before your coffee, before your day had started? Would you have sat down? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.